Hello, hello, everyone, and welcome to Nonprofit Enthusiast Live. I'm your host, Lasheena Williams, and so excited to be back with you all and talking about this month's topic of building stronger nonprofit networks. We know the importance of being able to have a sustainable networks that help us, whether it's donors, our staff, our volunteers. It's important to be able to build those relationships to help our organization be a long lasting nonprofit organization. And I'm excited to have our returning guest with us, Marilyn Donnellan, who's going to talk a little bit about some of these tips around building stronger nonprofit networks. So join me in welcoming her up. Hello, hello.
Hey, how are you, Lasheena?
I am good. Thank you so much for coming back on.
My privilege. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and I remember the last time you were here. I have my notepad ready, so I hope the viewers have their notepad, their pens, their whatever they take notes on ready because I remember you gave some really valuable tips. Um,
Good.
I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
Great.
So before we get started, can you first start out for those who may not have got to meet you in our last episode, just talking a little bit about how you entered the nonprofit arena?
Oh my goodness, that goes back. I actually started when I was a newspaper journalist, and the chairman of the board of a local nonprofit asked me if I would apply to be their executive director. Now, this was a very, very small organization. The executive director was everything: janitor, fundraiser, community involvement, everything. So it was kind of a baptism by fire because I had to learn how to do all those things and then make it work, make it simplified, so that I could manage everything that needed to be done. So that's how it started. And then I moved to progressively larger organizations. And along the way, I finally got around to getting my BA in human resources management. And then I'm not sure you'll believe this, but after I turned 65,
Mhm.
I finally got my master's degree. Yay.
Congrats.
But at the heart of all of this has really been, I love your title, Nonprofit Enthusiast,
Thank you.
because that's what excites me about, getting up every day is how can I make a difference with nonprofits who are making a difference in their communities. So if anyone can benefit from my experiences, that's fantastic. That makes me enthusiastic.
Yes, I love it, and I'm thinking about how you're talking about as you enter the field as an executive director with all those different hats.
Yeah,
And I know many of our viewers can relate to that. They might be in that position right now or have been in that position. I know I was in that position where
yeah,
you're wearing all these different hats, but you figure it out. And honestly, that's one of the
yeah.
things that make you really knowledgeable about the field, and you learn from those things that you've learned then to help you help others.
Exactly.
Mhm,
And that's the reason why I started writing
mhm.
when I retired the first time, was trying to convey to other people how to do things in a simplified way. So one of the first things I did was write a series called Nonprofit Management Simplified. And what it really does is focus on what I call the six core elements of a successful and sustainable nonprofit. And I can just quickly run through those if you.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
The core elements are resource development, or sometimes known as fundraising, marketing, administration, board and volunteer development, programs, and community involvement. Now, what I learned early on is that if I spend all my time and energy on fundraising and programs and ignore the other four, it's going to come back to bite me because you have to build that solid infrastructure so that you can raise money and so you can make effective program decisions.
I love that. And I love how that's simplified right there. You're talking about a
Right.
simplified nonprofit, you breaking it down into 6 areas. It's simplified as well. Because sometimes when starting a nonprofit, and I remember when I started, you were wearing all these hats, but being
Yeah.
able to kind of categorize them into these areas of, like you mentioned, admin, marketing, board and volunteer programs, and community involvement helps you kind of look like categorize where
Yes.
all your energy is going in the areas you want to build that someday you won't be the one doing alone.
Right. And in fact, if you keep those core elements at your forefront, then you will have 6 board committees that fit
Hmm.
with those core elements. You will have policies and procedures that fit in those core elements so that you're not ignoring anything.
Hmm.
A perfect illustration was the third nonprofit where I went to work. When I walked in the door, they had a $1.2 million deficit, and the board didn't know it. And it had happened because they had not been paying attention to the infrastructure. And they were borrowing from the next fundraising campaign to pay for the last year's expenses.
Mm.
Disaster. It almost put that whole organization down the tubes. And over the years, I've worked with hundreds of nonprofits, and that's at the core of success or failure. You can't build sustainability. You can't build effective programs. You can't raise money unless you are focused on all 6 of those issues.
I love that. I love that. Not one, not two, but looking at all of them.
Yes.
I love it. So, and that ties into this month's topic of building stronger nonprofit networks. So,
Right.
what would be some tips that you have for nonprofit organizations in doing that?
Well, building sustainability is really what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So it does involve building policies and procedures in all 6 of those core elements. That if you don't have that infrastructure, I don't care how good you are at fundraising or how fantastic your programs are, you're going to stumble and fail. Now, one of the things that I like to talk about when it comes to resource development, by the way, I call it resource development rather than fundraising,
Mm-hmm.
because it involves more than just raising money. It's
Mm-hmm.
raising resources, people, foundational stuff. But at the heart of that resource development is what I call, I don't know if you can see it there, it's
Yes.
backwards, gift acceptance policies.
Mm-hmm.
Most nonprofits don't have those. So
Mm-hmm.
let's say, for example, that somebody wants to give the nonprofit $1 million. Wouldn't that be great, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they happen to be the company that your nonprofit is suing for environmental or climate issues. And it really
Mm-hmm.
feels like a bribe, right? But
Mm-hmm.
you're sitting there thinking, oh, $1 million, just think what I could do with that. Well, this little book in the toolkit series really helps the board and staff to develop the underlying policies and procedures when it comes to when do you accept a gift, when do you not accept a gift,
Mm-hmm.
and how do you handle all that? What do you have in terms of a written donor's rights statement?
Mm-hmm.
So all of those things get back to the infrastructure, particularly when it comes to resource development. Now, because most nonprofits are always scrambling for funds, I think that's a perfect example of how important it is to put in place the basic principles of resource development. I mean, for those of us who've been in the business for a while, ho hum, I've had XYZ hundred events. I know how to raise money. I have a donor list of 5,000, da 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 da. But if you don't have the right policies and procedures, it's going to crumble and fall. It just will. I guarantee it. Now, in order to build sustainability, not only do you have to have those policies and procedures, but you must have a strategic plan that fits with all of those six core elements. Because without a plan, you're throwing a dart at a wall with no
Mm-hmm.
target. So, those are the basic things I think of sustainability that are absolutely essential.
Love it. So, speaking of strategic plan, I remember, like when it used to be, okay, you need a 3 year, a 5 year strategic plan to kind of get you ahead. And then the pandemic came. And then it went to, you need a 3 month and a 6 months. It's like, you just need to survive.
Yeah, and in fact, carrying out the theme of nonprofit management simplified, I
Uh-huh.
also developed a simplified strategic planning process
Mm-hmm.
so that it fits exactly with what you're saying. Those 5 year plans are out of date the minute you publish them. So you
Mm-hmm.
need to develop a planning system that
Mm-hmm.
engages the board, engages the staff, and is updated every 3 months, 6 months, whatever, however long it is taking your organization to make a shift. Now,
Mm-hmm.
that occurs with maybe a large donation that you get, and you suddenly have to figure out what are we going to do with all that money? Or maybe there's a scandal that is involved with somebody on staff. I know of one situation a few years ago where somebody was the head of a well respected nonprofit organization. The board found out that he had been embezzling funds to the
Mm-hmm.
tune of almost a $500,000.
Wow.
In order to protect the reputation of the organization, the board chose to put that under the table, not have him arrested, and just ask for his resignation. Well, guess what? He's now in an even bigger nonprofit.
Mm.
He got a slap on the wrist. Nobody knows what he did. And I can almost guarantee he's probably doing it again.
Wow.
All because that first nonprofit wasn't willing to bite the bullet and say, this guy embezzled $500,000 from our nonprofit.
Oh,
So
wow.
we're back to infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
It takes the emotion out of it. So you have to have those policies that say, how do we keep this from happening? Number one. Number two, if it does, how are we going to deal with it?
Mm-hmm.
Now, that also requires time and effort educating the board and staff around these six core elements, engaging them in the whole strategic planning process.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That is awesome. And I love your example in showing the importance of having those policies and procedures in place, because if you don't have them in place, you're right. When those things happen, you lose more of the, like, this is what we abide by, and you go more to the emotional side in the decision
Exactly.
making process.
Very
Um,
good. Yes,
which
you're
could get
right.
you in more trouble.
Yes, right. You're right. Because I really don't think the first organization ever really survived that,
Mhm.
because they
Mhm.
were constantly afraid somebody was going to get the word out to the local media. And so they kind of like a turtle hiding in its shell. They
Mhm.
were afraid to do what needed to be done. And as a result, they hurt their clients.
Mhm. Wow. Oh, so what other tips do you have for building? So we have policies and procedures and
Right.
having that in all six of the areas within your organization.
Right.
Any other tips that you would like to share?
Well, I did mention the importance of board training.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Training on their roles and responsibilities are absolutely essential. Now, over the years, I've literally had hundreds of board members that I've been involved with, either as a CEO or as a trainer, because I facilitate and train nonprofits. And I can count on one hand the number of nonprofits that required training of their board members and new staff
Mhm.
on roles and responsibilities and lines of authority, because where boards start trampling in the responsibilities of the executive director, you've got a recipe for chaos
Mhm.
because the board is overstepping their bounds. And as a result, you can really have big problems. And believe me, I know. I learned this the hard way. I had a board member on my third nonprofit who, when I came to town and was hired as the new CEO, he was a local real estate mogul. And he came into my office all enthused and said, "Glad to have you here. Come on, I'll take you and introduce you to the mayor." Well, I thought, oh, this is a good potential donor, right? So I let him squire me around the community. Um, and then at one point he said, I'd really like to be on the board. Now, this was before I really understood how important board training and even vetting is.
Mhm.
So I went ahead and recommended him to the nominating committee. Long story short, the day after he came on the board, he comes into my office, puts his feet up on my desk, and says, "Marilyn, I have been responsible for getting the women of two other nonprofits fired, and you're next." True story.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm sitting there in shock. I'd only been on the job like a month.
Yeah.
So I knew, having worked with boards long enough, I knew that if I confronted him, it would go nowhere. So I talked to another board member that I trusted. And
Mhm.
at the next board meeting, he confronted him on a lie, a blatant lie that he was telling. And the board kicked him off the board.
Mm.
I didn't lose my job. He lost his,
Yeah.
because I had learned the hard way how to engage the board and not usurp their authority. They put him on the board, not me. I had
Mhm.
suggested it, but they put him on the board. It was their responsibility, if he got out of line and overstepped his bounds, to take care of it. That wasn't my job.
Mhm.
So learning how to to implement the roles, responsibilities, and lines of authority is so essential for the smooth operation of a nonprofit organization. Only then are you going to be able to develop sustainability policies, procedures, and plans that are going to take you forward by decades.
So let me know. So, okay, you talked about training, you talked about strategic planning, and for organizations, do you believe this is a like, should they seek outside help or should they try to take this on themselves? And I know there's pros and cons
Yeah.
to both. So I just want to get your thoughts on that.
Well, it's very interesting you raise that, because I do a lot of mentoring with young
Mhm.
executives. And I got a telephone call last week
Mhm.
from one who said that she had done some strategic planning for a state level organization. And she was talking about how difficult it was because the board members that she was facilitating the planning process with were almost toxic. They just could
Mm.
not work together. And as a result, they'd been stuck in a situation where they weren't growing, they weren't sustainable. And she said to me, and I'll never forget what she said. She said, "Marilyn, I really don't think they're going to last another year."
Mm.
And she could tell that by seeing the dynamics of a board that was infighting. They weren't willing to do what needed to be done in order to build a sustainable organization. And that's really sad.
Mhm.
because you see the egos get in the way of good board development.
Mhm. Wow. Yeah. And the thing about that, I having those outside view, they probably don't even notice what's going on. Like they're probably or that they're
Exactly.
stifling the growth of the organization.
Yeah, I think you actually picked up on what I was trying to say in a kind of convoluted way. I was definitely saying you need somebody neutral to come
Mhm.
in and facilitate the process, especially if the organization is in trouble, if
Mhm.
they're stuck, if they're in trouble. Having a professional consultant come in, facilitate the process. It's real. Well, the second thing of that is, are you going to pay attention to what they say?
Right.
If you're
That
not going
happens
to
too.
listen,
Mhm.
yeah, why pay the money to hire somebody?
Mhm.
Because if you're not going to do what they suggest, in fact, she said one of the board members said to her, "You know, we hired you, we can fire you." And you know what her response was? "Well, yeah, you may have hired me, but I can quit too."
Right.
So she's
Oh,
a real
wow.
pistol, and she was perfect for that because it was a board that I had worked with the board years ago and had
Mhm.
run into exactly the same problem. And they just weren't willing to do what needed to be done to make the organization sustainable.
Mhm. Wow. Man, these examples, and they're real, like you can
Yeah,
see those every day, some strain of the examples that you're giving.
yeah,
Wow,
yeah.
yeah. So tell us how people can stay connected with you.
Oh, I would love that.
Hmm.
My email address is mldonnellanauthor@gmail.com. You can find my books on Amazon. Just do a search for my name. I have an author's page, and if someone wants to reach out to me, I can certainly give them the details. I've actually written about 60 books, and I have a couple of dozen training videos that are perfect for working with the board or showing how to do the simplified strategic planning process. So I can make all of that available to somebody if they just reach out to me. I may be retired for the second or third time, I've lost track, but my enthusiasm for this sector is just, it's even greater than it was when I started almost 40
Wow.
years ago. So I just love working with nonprofits. And if there's anything I can do to help, I would be delighted to talk to somebody.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. We definitely appreciate you coming on. And hopefully you'll come on and join us for future episodes. Every episode, you're just giving us more knowledge and absolutely appreciate it. So hopefully you'll come back on to future episode, and we appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you. And I do have 8 principles of resource development. So if that fits into your schedule at some point, I would love to share those as well. I
Oh,
got
it
a
definitely
million
does.
of them.
Yes, I love it. Yep, especially our November, because November is all that, Giving Tuesday, a lot of resource development conversations. So,
Good.
leading up to November, we would love to have you back on to discuss.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lasheena. It's been fun.
Yep, same here. You're welcome. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next Nonprofit Enthusiast Live. Bye, everyone.